Welcome back to Cryptid's Den. I just want to take a moment to truly thank you for sticking around, for showing up, and for being part of this journey with me. The time we've shared here means more than words can say. I hope today's treating you kindly. Let me know where you're watching from. I always look forward to hearing from you. And if you haven't yet, feel free to subscribe and drop a comment. This space wouldn't be the same without you. Now, let's get into it. I know it sounds impossible, but the thing that saved my life wasn't a man. It wasn't even human. 11 winters ago, I should have died, frozen in a snowstorm deep in the Smoky Mountains. But something found me. Something enormous, quiet, gentle, a Bigfoot. Since that night, I came back every year. Not to hunt, just to leave a silent offering. My way of saying thank you. I never saw it again. Until the 12th year, when it stepped out of the trees. But it didn't come to accept my thanks. It came, begging for help. It led me to a cave. Inside, there was a smaller creature, frail, starving, locked in a rusted cage. Its eyes, they were rent wild. They were terrified and pleading. I freed. I took it back to the woods with Sage. That's what I started calling the Bigfoot. I think it might have been its child. I named the little one Junebug. Over time, Junebug began to trust me, and for the first time since my wife passed, I didn't feel so alone. But the forest doesn't just shelter kindness. One night, something else came. A second creature, bigger, crueler. It wanted Junebug back. Zaga fought it beneath the moonlight, and won. But he never got up again. I buried him where the wind sings through the trees. And I raised Junebug like my own. Years later, when I passed, my granddaughter found this journal. She read every word, and now, maybe you will too. They say Bigfoot is a myth. But I know better. Because once in a frozen forest, a monster taught me how to love again. I didn't go back to those mountains to find anything. Not really. I just needed to know if the eyes I saw that night, if they'd ever looked at me with something close to kindness, something close to human. I parked the truck at the old trailhead before sunrise, the air thick with pine and ghosts. My pack was light, just some dry hickory, 2 red apples, a strip of deer bone I'd wrapped in red thread, and an old photograph that had yellowed at the edges. I left the rifle behind, didn't even bring the pistol. This wasn't that kind of walk. The Smokies were quieter than I remembered, not silent. No forest ever is, but quieter, like even the animals were watching. I knew the trail, or at least the shape of it. 11 years was a long time, but grief doesn't forget the way. The last time I'd come through here, my truck spun out on a patch of ice, right at the bend where the trees thicken. Snow was coming down sideways, headlights useless. The front end of my Dodge buried deep in a frozen ditch, and all I could think was, this is how it ends. But it didn't. Something moved behind the storm. Quiet, huge. I didn't see it clearly, just the impression of bulk, the weight of presence. But I felt the truck lift, like it was being cradled. When I looked again, my front wheels were on gravel, and a fresh pine sprig was lying on my windshield, as if someone, or something, had said a prayer over me. I told myself I imagined it. Told the nurse at the clinic I'd crawled out and found a ranger. But when I slept that night, I dreamed of eyes. Not animal eyes, watching eyes. So here I was, 11 years later, older, tear-a-day, carrying the things I never said out loud. The place hadn't changed, a clearing shaped by time and wind, the trees circling like old sentinels. At its center, a ring of stones, laid in a pattern too deliberate for chance. Only 2 souls ever knew that place. Me and it. I knelt and laid down the offerings. The apples, the bone, the photo. It was her. Maria. She'd been gone 8 years now. Cancer's a thief. Took her faster than I could say goodbye properly. She used to laugh when I'd talk about the one that saved me out in the woods. Said if it ever showed up again, I better ask if it was single. The dirt felt soft beneath my knees, damp with old rain. I sat, breathing slow, listening to the wind shift through the evergreens. I don't know if you remember me, I said. My voice cracked like old timber. But I remember you, the stillness answered. Then, footsteps. Heavy, not rushed. About 50 yards off, the kind of footsteps that pressed intention into the ground. I didn't move, just listened. The breath behind them was slow, strained, not like a predator's, like someone carrying something too long. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out Marian's picture again, and set it gently against the closest rock. If you're still out there, thank you for the silence you gave me when I had nothing left worth speaking. The footsteps paused, not gone, not approaching, just waiting. There was no fear in me, not anymore, only this low ache, the kind that settles in your ribs and refuses to be named. My eyes burned. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe not. I stood after a while. Bones protested. I dusted off my jeans, slung the empty pack over my shoulder. The clearing stayed silent as I left. I didn't turn around, but halfway back down the ridge, something made me stop. Call it instinct. I looked over my shoulder. Just once. The photo was still there, but now, a single golden pine needle, long curved, was resting against its edge. No wind could have laid it like that. I stood still. My breath caught in my throat. Marian always said real love doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to explain. It just needs to see you. And to stay. Like those eyes. That night. Standing in the snow, not walking away. Not blinking, just waiting. Like it had something to say. And all the time in the world to say it. I kept walking. But not the same man I was when I came up. Something had opened. Slow and painful. Like a door you hadn't touched in years. And I knew this wasn't the end. Not for me, not for it. The next morning, I went back. Didn't sleep much. My back hurt from the cot in the cabin. But that wasn't it. I kept seeing the photo in my mind. Marian's face frozen in black and white. And that golden pine needle laid so carefully at its edge. It wasn't just a memory. Something had been there. Something still he was saying. The forest held its breath as I walked. No bird song. No crunch of deer. Even the wind seemed to move different. Soft around the ears, like it didn't want to interrupt. I followed the ridge down to the clearing. Slower this time. There was no rush. The place would still be there. It always was. And it was. Every stone exactly where it had been. The photo still resting against the largest one. The apples gone. The hickory too. Even the deer bone stripped clean. But the photo, Marian's face, was dry, clean, like someone had shielded it with care through the cold night. I didn't touch it, just stood there, staring down at the stone ring. Then I saw the ash. There wasn't any fire last night. No reason for there to be ash. But just a few feet beyond the stones, gray dust scattered across the dirt, too fine, too fresh. And in the middle of it, prints. Not boots, not hooves, bare feet. Huge, 5 toes, no claws. The shape of them wasn't ape-like. No dragging knuckles, no wide arches. They looked almost human, only larger, cleaner, more precise than they had any right to be. They stood out against the ash like a signature. I found myself crouching, tracing one edge with my fingertip, like I needed to feel it to believe it was real. A chill climbed my spine and sat there. I whispered, "You came back. To the left, About 10 feet from the clearing, a low branch bent downward, twisted gently into a curve. At first, I thought it snapped. But when I stepped closer, I saw it had been bent, not broken. A loop deliberate, and my stomach dropped. I'd seen that shape before. Not out here, not in this life, in a dream. Right after the accident 11 years back. The doctors said it was shock. Trauma response. But I remembered it clear as daylight. A spiral shape burned behind my eyelids, held in something's palm. I thought I made it up. We always think we're dreaming when truth doesn't fit the world. Now it was here, made of oak and rain. I knelt again, placing my hand flat against the cold dirt beneath the branch. My voice felt small, but solid. If you remember, I do too. Something shifted behind me. Leaves, a presence. I turned slowly. Nothing there. Not close, at least. But then movement between the trees. Something tall. Too tall. Moving not with fear, but with intention. No sprint. No darting. Just walking. Like it wanted to be seen. A silhouette between trunks. Half shadow, half form. Brownish hulking. Graceful in its own impossible way. And then it was gone. Just like that. But not like before. Not like a ghost. This time, it let me look. I stood frozen, heart pounding like I had just run a mile uphill. Not from fear, from understanding. And something else. Recognition. A memory I'd buried clawed its way up without warning. That night after the wreck, back when I still smelled like antifreeze and blood, I dreamed again. Eyes huge and wet. They weren't angry. They weren't curious. They were lonely. I remembered thinking even then that this thing hadn't saved me out of instinct. It had saved me because it knew what it meant to lose, knew what silence could rot into if left too long. That memory sat in my chest like wet stone. I didn't go chasing after it. I didn't need to. If it wanted me to follow, it would have waited. Instead, I sat back down at the stones, staring at the loop in the branch, the tracks in the ash, and the photo of the woman who once said to me, on a porch in Tennessee, back when we still had summers ahead of us, "Real love doesn't need to explain itself. It just shows up and stays even when nothing makes sense." The breeze came again. This time it felt warmer, like breath on the back of my neck. I stayed there until the light changed, until the clearing started to gray with evening. And before I left, I did something I didn't plan. I reached for the photo, kissed 2 fingers and touched her cheek one last time. Then I placed it back down and whispered to the trees, "I'm not going anywhere. Not until you're ready." And I meant it. Because what I saw in those eyes that night, what I saw again today, wasn't a wild animal. It was something that he remembers, something that yields. And I was starting to fear something deeper than claws or teeth. I was starting to fear it might stop coming back. It came back on the 3rd night. Not as a shape in the trees, not as a breath over my shoulder. This time, it stood there, out in the open, like it had run out of places to hide. I just stepped out from the cabin, the lantern still swinging on its hook behind me, when I saw it. Big, solid, half shadow, half moonlight. I didn't move, couldn't. My breath caught somewhere between my ribs. It didn't growl, didn't run, and shoulders rose and fell like it'd been walking for miles. And then it did something that made my chest tighten. It stepped forward, 2 paces, slow, cautious. Then it lowered its arm. In its hand, dangling like a ghost, was a strip of cloth. Dark, torn, stained with something too old and too brown to be anything but blood. It didn't drop it, just held it out toward me like a question. I swallowed hard. My feet moved on their own, slow, steady. Every instinct in me screamed to freeze. But something deeper pushed past that. I took the cloth from its hand. Warm, still, like it'd been held a long time. I glanced down, then back up, and it turned. Not to run, but to lead. And so I followed. It didn't look back once, but its pace matched mine, like it knew I'd keep up. We moved through thickets and shallow streams, past rocks I didn't recognize. Farther and farther from the cabin. The forest changed the deeper we went, older somehow. The trees leaned in tight, their trunks thick with moss and time. The air turned colder, stiller. Then it stopped. We stood at the mouth of a cave, hidden behind a curtain of vines so thick I'd have missed it even in daylight. The creature, no, not creature, not anymore, reached out with one hand and pulled the vines aside. I waited. It didn't gesture, just stepped to the side, breathing heavy, like it had held something in too long. I took the flashlight from my coat, clicked it on. The beam caught wet stone, cracked walls, a dirt floor. The smell hit first. Old iron, mold, damp rock. Then something else. Something wrong. I stepped in and saw it. A cage. Not made by nature, not some animal burrow or root trap. This was man-made. Rusted iron bars, thick and crude, welded together in angles that didn't care about mercy. Green moss clung to the joints. Vines curled through the base. But it held. Inside, something moved. Not fast. Not with strength. A shape, curled, thin, shaking in the dark. My hand tightened on the flashlight. It was another one. Smaller, much smaller. Its ribs showed through its fur, breath shallow and quick. Eyes sunken but still watching. Not blinking. Not blinking. It gripped one of the bars like it was the only thing left keeping it in this world. And then something happened that I still can't explain. The one who brought me there. The one I now knew wasn't just surviving out there. It knelt. Knelt beside the cage. Slowly, gently, it reached into a satchel made from bark and twine, pulled out half an apple, slid it through the bars. Then it reached again. A hand. Huge. Calloused. Brushed along the side of the little one's face. Soft. Circular. Like a mother calming a child after a nightmare. That broke something in me. I looked down at the cloth in my hand again. It was a wrap. Torn from something larger. Probably once white. Now stiff with time and stains. I crouched beside the cage. "You kept it alive," I whispered. The bigger one didn't move. Just stared, eyes locked on the small one inside the cage. Not like a guard, like a guardian. "How long?" I asked. My voice cracked. The wind shifted behind me, and I realized the forest had gone quiet again. But this wasn't the same hush as before. This was grief. Long, hard, patient grief. I looked again at the bars, saw the way the moss grew over the base, the rust patterns. This wasn't days. This wasn't weeks. Years. It had been trapped for years. And still, it was alive. Because this thing, this Zaging, I don't know where the name came from, but it fit, had been coming back. Again and again. Feeding it, protecting it, loving it. Even when it could do nothing but curl up behind the rust and wait. And I, the old man with no purpose left and too many ghosts. I had been brought here not to see, but to help. The sage looked at me now, really looked, not with fear, not with demand, with hope, raw, fragile hope. I reached through the bars, just enough to place my hand next to the little one's. Cold fingers brushed mine. Not claws, not rage, just presence. "I'm here," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." The sage placed one hand on my shoulder, heavy, but not to weigh me down, to steady me. I don't know how long we stayed like that. But when I stood, I didn't feel cold anymore. And I knew what had to come next. Because not every cage holds a monster. Some cages hold something that was meant to be loved. And somehow, this wasn't just about rescue. It was about redemption. For them. For me. And maybe, for whatever part of the world had looked away too long, we stepped inside. The cave swallowed the light like it hadn't seen it in years. My flashlight cut through the dark in a narrow cone, but it barely touched the corners. The air was wet and heavy, clinging to the back of my throat like mildew. I could hear water dripping somewhere deep, a rhythm slow enough to feel ancient. My boots squished against the moss-covered stone floor. The sage moved ahead of me, one hand grazing the jagged wall, the other clutched in a fist by its side. It didn't make a sound. Not one. Like it knew the space was sacred somehow. Or broken. The light finally caught the cage. It was worse than I remembered. Iron bars crusted in rust, twisted with age. Some bent out like something had tried to push through. Maybe more than once. There were patches of green slime along the base, vines curling up from underneath, like the forest had tried to reclaim it but failed. A place like that shouldn't exist. Not out here. Not anywhere. And inside, the little one. He wasn't moving. Just sitting there, back to the bars. Head down, fingers curled around one of the thick crossbeams, like they were the only thing left real in the world. His fur was patchy, matted, thin over the ribs. His legs were pulled up tight to his chest, but I could see the way his arms shook. Barely, but enough to know he wasn't asleep. Just waiting, like he'd learned it was safer not to be seen. The sage knelt slowly, pressing one hand to the bars. No sound, no motion. Then she reached again into that pouch made of bark and twine and pulled out a piece of fruit. Soft, a little overripe, and pushed it gently through the rust. The little one didn't move. Not at first. But then his nose twitched. Just once. And he lifted his head, slowly. Like every muscle hurt to do it. His eyes were glassy, yellowed at the edges. Too big for his gaunt face. But they locked onto the sage like gravity. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her fingers reached through, traced along the side of his face. Gentle. Circular. Again and again. Not to comfort. To remember. I turned off the flashlight. I didn't need it anymore. The light filtering in from outside was soft enough now. And my eyes adjusted just enough to see the sage's silhouette fully, shoulders hunched beside the cage. She wasn't some wild thing. She wasn't here to terrify anyone. She was a mother. And that thing in the cage wasn't a beast. He was a child. I crouched next to her, not close enough to touch, but near enough to see the way her breathing slowed as she watched him eat. Tiny bites. Chewing slow. Like he hadn't used his jaw in days. Or weeks. The silence held me in place. How long had this been going on? How long had she been coming here? Slipping through the trees. Dodging whatever had built this place in the first place. Just to feed him. Just to let him know someone was still on the other side. I stared at the cage. At the rust. The bolts. The design wasn't careless. It was old, but human. Welded. Riveted. Meant to last. Meant to trap. Some bastard had put this here a long time ago, and no one had come back for what they caught. Except her. I felt sick. My voice caught in my throat, but it came anyway. You've been keeping him alive, in this? The sage didn't look at me, but her hand stayed on the cage. And I knew the answer. This wasn't about survival. Not anymore. It was about guilt, or love, or both. I shifted to my knees and pressed my hand against the metal. Cold bit into my skin. The little one flinched, just for a second. Then he looked at me, not the way an animal looks at a man, the way a prisoner looks at a stranger with keys in his hand. I swallowed. I'll get you out." The words came out like a promise I didn't know how to keep. The bars didn't look like they'd break easy. Hell, I didn't even have tools, but I couldn't walk away. Not after this. I looked back at her, at the sage. Her shoulders rose, then dropped like she'd been holding that breath for years. And when I turned to leave, to go get what I'd need, she stayed behind. She sat there beside the cage, watching him chew, humming so softly I thought maybe the rocks were just settling. But no, it was her, and it was beautiful. As I stepped through the curtain of vines, back into the world where cages didn't belong, I stopped. Just before the light swallowed me whole again, I turned. The last thing I saw was her hand, still through the bars, still on his cheek, still trying to say something no word in our language could hold. And the thing that hit hardest wasn't the look on his face. It was the realization that she had done this, over and over, in the dark, for years, with no one watching, no one thanking her, no one even knowing. And still, she came. I felt it then, deep in my ribs, like something cracking. "Mama," I whispered. I didn't mean to say it, but I did. And she didn't flinch. She just kept humming. We broke the cage at dawn. It didn't go fast. That old iron wasn't ready to let go, not even after all those years. I came back with a crowbar, a hacksaw, 2 lanterns, and hands that shook more from what this menting than the cold. The sage was already there, waiting, seated beside the cage like she hadn't moved since the night before. Maybe she hadn't. The little one was awake, not startled, not afraid. Just quiet, like something inside him had already accepted what was coming. His fingers curled tighter around the bars as I approached. I set the lanterns down, lit both, and took a deep breath. "I'm not gonna hurt you," I told him, like I had said it a dozen times already in my own head. Then I nodded to the sage. She stepped aside, but not far. She didn't take her eyes off him once, not even when I began cutting. The sound of metal grinding echoed through the cave, shrill and ugly, louder than I'd prepared for. I flinched with every stroke, afraid each shriek would bring something we couldn't handle, but nothing came. Just the slow, stubborn cry of rust giving way. He didn't move. Not once. Not even when the first bar fell free and clanged against the floor. His eyes stayed locked on the sage, like she was the only thread he trusted to pull him through. By the time I cracked the last bolt, sweat had soaked through the back of my shirt. My hands were blistered. My arms burned. But when I finally pried that corner open, I didn't step back. I knelt. I placed the tools down carefully and looked right at him. "It's open," I said. "You don't have to stay in there anymore." He stared at the opening. His breathing picked up, but his body didn't move. I thought maybe he didn't understand. Maybe it'd been too long. Maybe he didn't remember what freedom was supposed to feel like. But then the sage moved forward. She didn't speak. She didn't reach through. She just leaned close and touched her forehead to the bars. One soft, slow press of bone against rust. That did it. The little one rose, wobbled. His knees shook so bad I thought he might fall, but he didn't. He stepped forward, reached out, and mirrored her movement. Forehead to forehead, one last time through the cage. Then he ducked under the gap, dragging 1 foot behind him. And just like that, he was out. Free. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. My throat was thick. I watched him stumble forward into the sage's arms. She caught him, slow and steady, like she'd been holding that moment in her chest for years. She didn't cry, but her breath shuddered in and out like someone finally remembering how to be alive. I gave them space. Carried the tools out first, cleared the vines, made a path back up the ridge. The sun was barely breaking over the trees when we stepped into the clearing together. Her, holding him like he weighed nothing, like he'd never been heavy at all. He blinked against the light, weak but watching. Every sound made him flinch at first, but he stayed close to her side, his small hand always touching some part of her arm or shoulder. I noticed he still didn't make a sound, Not a grunt. Not a breath. Not even a cry. I thought maybe he couldn't. That first day, I brought them to the edge of my land. I had a spot out behind the cabin. A clearing with soft dirt, not too far from a stream. We didn't go inside the house. I didn't think it felt right. Not yet. I built a small fire. Nothing big. Just enough to warm hands. She sat beside it, holding him wrapped in some woven shawl made of bark and cloth I had never seen before. He didn't sleep. Not really. Just drifted in and out, flinching any time my boots scraped too loud against stone. But something changed that night. While I was cooking on the fire, just canned beans, nothing fancy, I noticed him watching me, not her, me. He tilted his head, eyes narrowed. Then he reached out, not for food, for the eye spoon. I handed it to him. He held it wrong, awkward in his grip, but then turned it slowly, mimicking how I'd scoop. He brought it to his mouth. Missed. Tried again. No complaint, no frustration. Just trying. Like a kid. I watched him for a while. The way he studied every motion, how he wiped his mouth after a bite with the back of his hand. Then tried again with his palm, like he'd seen me do it. Later, while I cleaned up, he crawled into her lap and pressed his face against her chest, her arms wrapped around him without a sound. The fire crackled low. I said, almost to myself, "You didn't just keep him alive, did you?" She looked at me, those eyes deep and knowing. "You raised him, in the dark, with no help, with no help." She didn't nod. She didn't have to. I stared into the fire for a long time after that. When I finally lay down in my cot outside, the stars overhead, I could still hear the sage breathing, steady, strong, and I could hear the little one's tiny inhales, tucked against her side. And I thought, all this time, I thought I came to repay a debt. But maybe I was here to learn something else entirely. Maybe saving someone isn't about dragging them out of the dark. Maybe it's about staying in the dark with them until they're ready to walk toward the light on their own. And that night, when the flames dropped to ember, and the wind swept soft through the trees, I swear I heard something. Quiet. A hum? Low. From her and him, he pressed his hand gently against mine. But in that moment, he didn't have to. It came at night. Not with sound, not at first. Just the feeling that something was wrong. The kind that slides into your gut before your brain catches up. I'd stepped outside the cabin to check the fire. Junebug was asleep in the lean-to, curled against Sage's chest, and the woods had gone deady silent. No crickets, no rustle. Just thick, choking quiet, like the trees were holding their breath. That's when I saw the eyes. Red, low to the ground at first, then rising. Higher, too high for any bear or cat. I didn't move. Couldn't. The fire popped behind me and I flinched, just enough to snap myself out of it. I took one step back toward the cabin, and that's when it stepped forward. It was nothing like Sage. Bigger, yes, but wrong. Thicker in the shoulders, its face more angular, its arms hanging too low, too loose, like something had stretched them past what nature intended. The eyes glowed like coal under pressure. Not curious, not cautious, predatory. It bared its teeth, not a snarl, a displaying. And then it came. I yelled before I even had time to think. "Sage!" She moved like lightning. One moment she was asleep beside the boy. The next she was between me and it. Her back arched, a deep sound rumbling out of her chest that didn't belong in this world. I saw Junebug dart behind a rock, small and shaking but watching every movement. The thing lunged. She met it full force. They slammed into each other hard enough to shake the ground. Bark rained from the trees. I fell, elbow catching on stone, and scrambled up again in time to see her take a hit. Its claws raked across her shoulder, deep and fast, but she didn't go down. She grabbed it by the throat, shoved it back, and warged. And that sound, God, that sound, echoed through the woods like a storm. I tried to help. Ran to grab the shovel I'd left near the fire, anything, but before I could get close, it turned on me. Just for a second. It was enough. I saw its face fully then. Scarred. Old. Covered in patches of hair and something darker I didn't want to name. Its mouth twisted like it remembered me, and hated me for it. But Sage didn't let it come near. She barreled into it from the side, knocked it back into the clearing, and they rolled through the leaves in a blur of fur and fury. It got a good hit in, dropped her hard against the trunk of a pine so hard the whole tree shook. I heard her ribs crack. She staggered. Blood pooled at her side. But when it went for her again, she didn't move back. She stepped in, took its claws full on, slammed her elbow into its chest, and shoved her hand under its chin, lifting its whole damn body off the ground for one impossible second. And then she threw it. The thing landed hard and didn't get back up. It didn't die. Not then. But it limped into the trees like it knew it couldn't win. And she didn't chase it. Just stood there. Hunched. Heaving. Bleeding. I rushed to her. Dropped the shovel. Grabbed a blanket. Anything, but I knew. She was going down. She turned toward Junebug. Reached out one trembling hand. He came slowly. Small steps. Like he didn't want to believe what he was seeing. She collapsed before he reached her. He cried out then. A sound I will never forget. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. It sounded human, raw, wounded, furious, like his heart had just been pulled out of his chest, and he didn't know how to live without it. I held her, my hands shaking, blood soaking through the blanket. Her chest still rose and fell, but slower. Too slow. She looked up at me. Her eyes weren't scared. They were tired. And then she did something I didn't understand at first. She reached into the pouch on her side, pulled something out with shaking fingers, pressed it into my palm. A stone. Smooth, heavy, flat on one side. And carved into it, barely visible in the firelight, was the spiral again. But this time it was broken. Cracked straight through the curve like lightning had split it. I looked at her. She nodded. Once. Just enough. And then her hand dropped. Her breathing stopped. And I was left kneeling there, holding a dying language I couldn't read, beside a boy who had no voice left to scream. I buried her at sunrise. Not far from the stream. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere trees could stand over her like family. I stacked stones, slow and even, like the ones she once left for me. Junebug sat close the whole time. He didn't cry again. But when I placed the last stone, he pressed his forehead to it and stayed there. No words, no sound, just memory. I sat beside him for a long time. The fire gone cold behind us. The sky starting to turn. The spiral stone still in my hand. I didn't know what it meant. She wasn't just a mother. She wasn't just a protector. She was the last of her kind who chose love over violence. And now that choice, whatever it cost, was mine to carry. I buried her with my own hands. Didn't want to wait. Didn't want the forest to forget her shape, her scent, her weight in the soil. I found a spot just above the creek bend, where moss grows soft enough to feel like breath under your feet, and the sun cuts through in narrow bands like old light remembering how to land. I marked the place with stone. Not too tall, not showy, just enough for the wind to know where to stop and bow its head. Junebug stood next to me the whole time. He didn't cry again. That one scream had emptied him out. Now he was quiet in a way that made my chest ache. His hand stayed close to his chest, palms open like he didn't know where to put them anymore. I tried to speak, tried to say something worth hearing. But all I got out was, she's safe now. And somehow, that felt like the only thing that mattered. Afterward, we walked back to the cabin. I didn't push. I let him move at his own pace. His steps were short, dragging. Like every inch of him still belonged to the cage, or the cave, or the curve of her arms. I'd seen that kind of grief before. It doesn't shout. It just hangs on everything. A heaviness in the leaves, a silence between words. It turns the sky a little too pale, even on a clear day. That night, I pulled out my old canvas tent, the one I used to take hunting before I stopped pulling the trigger, and pitched it just beside the porch. I didn't want to force him indoors. He wasn't ready for four walls. I lit the fire. He sat near it, not beside me, not far either, close enough to feel the heat but not the pressure. That felt like trust. I handed him a piece of cornbread wrapped in foil. He turned it over in his hand like it was made of glass. Then he sniffed it. Then he bit. He didn't smile. But he didn't flail. And that was something. The days after were quiet. I didn't talk much. I just showed him things. How to sweep out the tent with a pine branch. How to wash his hands in the cold creek without spooking the fish. How to flick a match with your thumb without burning your nail. He watched everything. He watched everything. His eyes tracked every move like he was memorizing the world one muscle at a time. He still didn't speak. But he listened and learned. One morning, I woke to find him sitting at the edge of the fire pit, stacking stones the way I'd stacked them for her. Careful, balanced, intentional. He placed one final rock on top, then dusted his hands off like he'd completed something only he understood. I started calling him Junebug around then. Didn't think it would stick. But he turned when I said it. Every time. "Hey, Junebug," I'd say, handing him a dry towel. "Firewood's this way." Or, "Junebug, pass me that tin." The one with the matches. No protest. No confusion. Just quiet understanding. I wrote it down in my journal that night. The same one I'd kept since Marion died. Yeah, he's not mine. But I think I'm the only one left to teach him how to live. That hit harder than I expected. It was this one evening. I don't even know why it stuck the way it did. But I was washing out the coffee pot at the creek, and I turned back. And there he was, sitting on the porch steps, holding a photo. Hey, photo. Marion, I froze. I hadn't given it to him. I'd kept it tucked between pages. Safe. Somehow, he'd found it. But he didn't treat it like something stolen. He cradled it like it was a story someone had whispered to him once, soft and careful. Then, with 2 fingers, he reached out and touched her face. Just once. Then he looked at me, no words, just that look. And I swear, in that moment, I felt her beside me, like the porch had folded space and time, and she'd stepped back into it for just long enough to let us both breathe. That night, as the fire cracked and the moon sank, he did something I still think about every time the wind moves through the trees in that certain way. He walked up to the cabin wall, dipped his fingers into the ash near the pit, and drew a arrow. Not perfect, uneven, smudged, but hers. The same shape she gave me. And when he finished, he looked at me, not asking for praise, not trying to impress, just saying, without saying. Yeah, remember too, I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there by the coals, hand resting on the spiral stone in my coat pocket, heart doing that slow, strange ache that has nothing to do with pain, and everything to do with something old being rewritten inside you. I don't know if I saved him, but I know this. He saved me right back, without a single word. I didn't know it was my last day. It felt like any other. Cool air drifting in from the ridge, leaves dancing low across the porch boards, a mug of coffee that'd gone cold before I remembered to drink it. Junebug was off in the trees somewhere. I had seen his shadow flicker past the window around dawn, light-footed and alert. Same as always. Never made a sound. Never needed to. He knew where the edges of this world were. I'd been writing again, a habit I thought I'd lost when Marion passed. But the pages had started filling themselves. Notes, sketches, bits of memory that kept tugging at me. I wasn't trying to explain it to anyone. Just leave something behind that wasn't silence. The spiral stone sat on the shelf above my bed. I touched it every morning, like a prayer. Not to a god, to her, to the one who stayed, and then gave everything when staying wasn't enough. I must have fallen asleep sometime after lunch. I remember my pen sliding from my fingers, the weight behind my eyes. That quiet, slow pull, like gravity shifting inward instead of down. I didn't wake up, not in the usual way. The rest, I know from what my niece found. She came looking for me 3 days later. Said I missed her birthday call, which wasn't like me. She drove up the old road, knocked on the cabin door, then let herself in. She told someone later the place felt peaceful, like I'd just stepped out for a walk and hadn't quite made it back yet. The fire had gone out. The coffee still sat on the table, half full. My journal lay open, a photo of Marian tucked between the last pages, and near my hand, a spiral stone. She said she picked it up, turned it once in her palm, and felt something settle in her chest, like knowing something you'd never been told. But Junebug was gone. No footprints, no broken branches, no sound, nothing but the faintest trace of ash near the edge of the porch. And in that ash, a spiral. Drawn clean, quiet, and whole. Like someone had left a signature, not for the living, but for the ones who understand. She stayed the night in the cabin, curled on the cot I used to sleep on. Couldn't bring herself to move anything. Just sat there with the journal open, flipping through the pages I'd written to no one and everyone at once. The last one said this: "If someone finds this, if you're reading now, just know I wasn't alone at the end. I didn't go into the dark empty-handed. I carried memories that weren't mine. A name that wasn't spoken. A child who never said a word but taught me more about love than most people ever do. I got to see something no one else did, and it saw me back. Tell them I wasn't crazy. Tell them it was real." She closed the book and didn't cry until morning. The locals say the ridge is haunted now. Not in a scary way. Not the kind of haunted that keeps people out. The kind that makes the wind sound different when it moves through the trees. The kind where animals pause near the clearing, but don't run. Where sometimes, just after sunset, a figure's seen standing still between the pines. Too tall, too still, too aware. Just watching. Once, my niece told me, she came back up to leave flowers. She placed them by the stone markers, one for Marian, one for Sage. She sat on the porch, eyes closed, listening to the rustle of the creek. And when she opened them, she saw it at the tree line, a shape, tall, broad-shouldered, not moving. Its hand pressed flat to its chest, like it remembered something worth holding on to. She didn't chase it, didn't speak. She just nodded, and it turned and vanished back into the forest. Back into the place where memory lives like roots beneath the soil, invisible, patient, and stronger than death. So maybe this is the part where the story ends. But I don't think stories like this ever really do. They shift, they hide, they wait. And if you're quiet enough, if you listen, you might catch the shape of it between the trees. Not with your eyes, with your heart. Because if something can love and remember and grieve, it was never just a creature. It was something sacred. And maybe, just maybe, the forest still remembers us too. Some stories live in silence, not because they were forgotten, but because the world wasn't ready to understand them when they happened. This was never just a story about the woods or something wild that moved between the trees. It was never just about fear or mystery or survival. What you've just heard is something much simpler, something more fragile and deeply human. It's about connection, about what it means to show up for someone who has nothing left, to stay when no one else would, to listen when words don't come easy or don't come at all. The truth is, some of the most important relationships in our lives don't need to be spoken out loud. Sometimes they're found in the quiet, in a gesture, in the way someone chooses to stay close even when they don't have to, in the small acts that say, "She, I remember. You're not alone. And maybe that's the real thread running through all of this. Not the mystery, but the mercy. Because kindness, when it's real, doesn't ask for anything back. It doesn't need recognition or reward. It exists in the dark, in the in-between, in the way someone reaches for another without thinking twice. And that kind of kindness, quiet, steady, unshakable, is the kind that changes the shape of the world without ever needing to raise its voice. We live in a time where it's easy to feel invisible, easy to believe that we're too broken to be worth saving, or too lost to find our way back. But stories like this remind us of something essential, that the smallest act of grace, the gentlest moment of presence, can echo louder than any shout, even in the loneliest places, even across the deepest silences. And perhaps that's where love really lives, not in grand declarations, but in the spaces we hold for one another when no one else is looking. Thank you for sitting with this story, for giving it the time and the stillness to land in your chest the way it was meant to. If it moved something in you, if it made you think of someone you've lost, someone you miss, or someone you still believe in, I'd love to hear about it. Leave a comment. Share what it stirred in you. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Because stories like this, they don't end. They just wait for someone willing to listen.